Okay, let's get started. I got the review for the final here. I'm definitely going through some things that'll be useful for it. Okay, so let's talk about the gravity model. The gravity model is the idea that the bigger and the closer, the more interaction. So two small things like two small cities far apart would not interact much at all. If they were huge cities, and even at distance, they probably interact quite a bit. But if they're really big cities and close together, then they interact a ton. That's the basic idea behind that. You could do the same thing with countries or other populated centers. The idea that the larger and the closer equals the more interaction overall. Region types. Um, they're right here. I should have separated them out a little bit better. Functional nodal means there's a center, and as you get away from that center, it gets weaker. A market area. Um, who reads a newspaper? Is strong at the center, but as you get away from that town where the newspaper is made, it's going to get weaker. Vernacular, perceptual, mental. That's the idea that that's like a mental map. Formal uniform means that the area is all the same according to some characteristic. So if you were to say the state of Illinois has an average income of $50,000 a year, that's a formal or uniform area. It's the state of Illinois that kind of makes it formal, but the idea that the average income is this. So for that whole area, the average income. It's basically an area where everything is the same according to some trait, and then you use it. Quite often gets used in mapping. Um, you can look up the definitions a little bit more for that if you need to. Map scale. Now let me rephrase this. So a large scale map has a large number. And remember, in fractions, 1/10 is a large number. It can only show you a small amount of area, but in a good amount of detail. So these will tend to be maps of smaller areas, like a map of a mall or something like that. A small scale map has a small fraction, like 1 to a million. 1/1,000,000th is a tiny number. And that means that basically you're probably going to see a lot of area in less detail. And that would be more likely a map of a continent or something along those lines. Okay. Chain migration. One group follows another from the same country, but they've got to be following because they heard about something. They communicate together. Chain migration was very important towards the formation of ethnic neighborhoods and why ethnic groups cluster together, among several reasons. That's just one of the reasons. Distance decay is when something, as the further away you go, the less interaction you get. Time-space compression means that distance does not matter. It does not cause a decay of anything, kind of opposites of each other. So remember with chain migration, we said that one group's got to go, communicates with the other, and then the next group follows. Okay, that seems to be everything here. Oh, one thing I didn't mention, intervening opportunity and obstacle. An intervening opportunity is like Hispanics coming to America. Usually don't go to Canada. Canada has a tiny Hispanic population because America is an intervening opportunity for a better life that's in the way of Canada. An intervening obstacle, especially during the 1800s and 1700s, the oceans and mountains were huge obstacles for people traveling. That's the idea behind that. Migration to the United States. Know the order. I got the order on here. This is when everything went. It's not that hard to remember this, I think. I think you'll be basically fine on it overall. Know that inter versus intra-regional. For example, inter-regional means from one region to another. For a big part of American history, people were going from the East Coast to the West Coast. Now people tend to be traveling a bit south as of late, towards the southern areas. Intra-regional means within a region. So up until the 1920s, people were moving into the cities. After World War II, people moved out to the suburbs. That's intra-regional because it's within a region. So like here in the Midwest, people moved from Chicago to the suburbs after World War II. There was a bit of a fleeing of the city. Another intra-regional trend, like that's kind of currently going on. We do a little bit of a movement to the suburbs still going on. So again, up until around 1920, movement towards the cities, that's intra-regional, rural to urban. And then nowadays, we see a little bit of that city to the suburbs, and that's an intra-regional, within a region. Okay. Let me see if there's any other questions on here I want to go through. I am thinking about questions. And I didn't have it on here, but refugees and IDPs. Remember, refugee means you crossed a border. IDP did not. That's internal. One of the biggest refugee crises ever in 1990s was the breakup of Yugoslavia. That caused a problem. Nowadays, the biggest refugee crisis is, of course, what's going on in Syria, and that might be one of the largest to have ever happened. Is the refugee crisis going on in Syria today? Okay. Oh, and remember, we talk about migration. The biggest migration pattern in the world is rural to urban. That's happening in less developed countries. Most people do not migrate to another country. If they do, they go to cities in those countries or highly urban areas. But most people are not. One other thing to point out is that people who are the most likely to move are the ones that are at working age. Single probably more likely than married, right? With a family, definitely not with a family, but working age people who can move. So most likely not married, most likely not with a family, and trying to think of anything else. Oh, and also probably closer. If they're closer to a more developed country, they're more likely to move internationally. Ease matters. And then remember, just take a look at these events and know them in chronological order. You get a rough idea of that. I put a general idea of the order, and then I got the specifics. All right. Map scale we talked about. We did that. The regions of the world. Sub-Saharan Africa is not too hard to guess. Middle East is sometimes known as Southwest Asia. South Asia is Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. Eastern Asia, China, Japan, and all that. Southeast Asia is like the peninsula below China, and then also the islands, Indonesia, that area, Philippines, that kind of area is part up in Southeast Asia. Although maybe the Philippines not, but Southeast Asia, like the Philippines, is kind of at the center of it. All right, and then of course there's Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and North Africa, Middle East, which is MENA. So, and then Latin America, which is from Mexico all the way down, and then of course North America, which includes Mexico. And that's about it. I think those are like some of the main regions that are good to be aware of. Which type of map would have the largest scale? I think you should be able to get that. Know your diffusion types. Hierarchical means it goes to the big cities first, then the smaller places, then the smaller places. Stimulus, it has to change. Like McDonald's goes to India, it serves different food, but it's still kind of fast food. Contagious, it goes from one person to the next, like a cold. Relocation is not a type of expansion diffusion. Relocation means that someone moves, like Polish moving to Chicago. They bring their language with them. It doesn't mean there are more speakers. It means that they've moved to a new area. So they've increased in area, but not numbers. Ravenstein, there's his ideas of what people are like and some of his rules there. And I think we've got, let's see here. I didn't have gender inequality on there. And we do know that women and children are like 2/3 of the impoverished in the world. And I think that helps out there. Let's see here. I'm looking at questions. That's why I'm delaying here. GDP. Remember, that's gross domestic product. It's the amount of goods and services a country produced within a year. And we talked about this. Less developed countries spend a high percentage of their GDP on education. The problem is they don't make much money, so the dollar amount is definitely less than what you find in more developed countries. We're so wealthy that we spend more per student, but it's a less percentage of our GDP by comparison to LDCs. And also, one other thing to point out, we talked about the informal and formal economies. Informal means it's not on the record. It might be a legal job, like it can be done legally, but it's not on the record. And that's the problem with the informal. You find that quite often in less developed countries. Formal means it's for the record, that you reported it to the government or paying taxes on it. So if someone babysits for you quite a bit during the year, but it's never reported to the tax people, well, that's an informal job. It doesn't necessarily mean illegal. Okay. Culture. Based on what you read about, let me see here. Pop culture versus folk culture. Okay. Or pop culture in many ways definitely represents a threat to folk culture as it spreads around the world. It takes over and dominates, and folk culture feels like it's diminished. Um, Pop culture tends to exist in MDCs more because people have more disposable income and free time than in LDCs. They're also exposed to it more because of a good infrastructure system. Pop culture has a negative effect on the environment because it involves the use of more material because you buy a lot of things that are not necessary, and it equals more waste. It also does not bend to the landscape as well. That's another thing. Trying to think of anything else about pop culture. Oh, it's more likely to use unnatural materials like plastics, things like that. Pop culture, you know the origins, and the origins are more recent. Folk culture, the origins go way back in time. You're less likely to know who started something. Folk culture is created by isolation. Different groups are isolated from other groups, and they develop their own little cultures. That always helps to create more and more diversity of cultures. Demographic transition. Pop culture societies, less likely to have kids, more tolerant of alternative lifestyles, and people not getting married, getting divorced, that kind of thing. Folk culture is more likely to reinforce the old-fashioned patriarchal family and having kids and gender roles and that kind of stuff. So folk culture societies and LDCs tend to have more kids. Language families. Sino-Tibetan and Indo-European are the biggest language families. Sino-Tibetan is kind of isolated. It's Mandarin, and it didn't end up going a lot of places. Indo-European, on the other hand, is big for a number of reasons. One is population, like India, because it does include the languages of India. But another thing is it's spread all over the place and has a wide number of people because of colonization. A lot of the Indo-European languages, the European languages, like Spanish and English and Portuguese, got spread to other places. Okay, the dominant languages. Over area, English is widespread. A lot of countries have it as special languages. We talked about why the two families are big. Sino-Tibetan is big just because of population growth primarily. Native speakers, Mandarin is the biggest. What language do a lot of people learn, though? That's English. That's the big one. And colonization. The internet, business, all of those are reasons for why it's so big nowadays. Okay. Questions? Oh, well, I think we got a lot there. Okay. All right. Well, I think we've got a lot going on here. Let me get to this one here. Religions. Islam. Shia and Sunni are some of the fastest growing. Well, Shia are only 15%. Sunni are the other 85%. Islam is the fastest growing religion because it exists in a lot of high population growth countries. Christianity doesn't exist in as many high growth population countries. In some of the areas like Europe and North America have lower growth. So it has some issues with that. So it is the biggest religion in the world right now, Christianity, but it could be replaced. Judaism is an ethnic religion but spread out, which makes it unusual. Buddhism is a universal religion, but it's mainly in one area. Hinduism has a large number of followers. Oh, where do we find religions in the United States? Let me explain a few things. Roman Catholics can exist in the Northeast and Midwest. That was the Europeans. Mainly, that's why that is. That was like the Irish and the Italians and groups like that. Nowadays, we get a bit of Hispanics. In the Southwest, you have Catholics. That's mainly because of Hispanics. In Louisiana, right by New Orleans, you get Catholics because of the French. Florida's getting Catholics because of Hispanics. Baptists in the South. Lutherans in Minnesota. Mormons in Utah. And then other areas, might have some Protestants and things like that. I think that's about it. Let me see here. We got this. You know the difference between pop culture and folk culture. Went through a list of that. You should know what the word diffusion means. We got this. We got this. These are a lot of repeats. Oh, one thing to point out is that most people in Europe speak the Indo-European family, but the Altaic, I believe, is in Finland, Hungary, and Estonia, that language family. Only those ones. Let's see here. We did this. Oh, English is a lingua franca, so is Swahili, but it's not one we go over too much. Oh, one thing we should mention a little bit, we're going to be getting into this, but we talked about it before, multilingual countries are usually multinational countries. Like Spain has the Catalans and the Spanish and the Basque. Belgium has the Walloons and the Flemish. And that's language as well as ethnic group for those countries. United Kingdom has the Scottish and the Northern Irish, but the language differences have diminished. They mainly use English, but there are definitely dialect differences, which are still significant there. Let's see what else. Oh, no, the difference between an ethnic and a universal religion. Ethnic religions try and convert people. Universal religions do not. Ethnic religions tend to gain more importance from local area and places. Universal religions tend not. They tend to be more around about the founder. Universal religions is about preaching the words of the followers. Ethnic religions will be more likely to be tied to a set location, have their holy places really connected to physical features of places. Those are some just generalities about those. And ethnic religions tend to be smaller than that. Okay. Know the difference between a branch and a denomination. And we talked about the Sunni and the Shia. And Shia are a minority, and we mentioned that Shia, there's only two countries that are majority Shia, and that's Iran and Iraq. Okay, I think that covers a lot of that. Oh, in Europe, you guys know Northern Europe tends to be more Protestant. United Kingdom more Anglican, and the Scottish are Presbyterian. Ireland, of course, Catholic. But then Northern Germany and Scandinavia are more Lutheran, and then Southern Europe more Catholic, and then Eastern Europe is more Eastern Orthodox, except Poland is Catholic. Yeah, that's just a general idea of Europe. Okay. Got that? Okay, site and situation. Site is about the physical features on the ground. Situation is what's near or far from you, your relative location to things. Site is about your absolute location, physical characteristics of what's right there on the ground where you are. Physiological density, number of people to farmable land. Agricultural density is the number of farmers to farmable land. So if physio was 10 and agricultural was 5, that would mean that half your people were farmers. There were 10 people, 5 of them farmers for every square mile, okay? That's the basic idea behind that. Arithmetic density is just regular density, number of people per square mile. There's only so much that you can get out of those. If your agricultural density is pretty close to your physiological density, then that means you're a less developed country because a lot of your people are farmers. If your physiological density is very high, it probably means, most likely, you don't know definitely, means a strain on resources. So we've got that. We talked about different types of diffusion, like contagious, which goes to the most closest things first. Your regions, we did that. Possibilism and determinism. Remember, possible environmental possibilism means the environment limits your possibilities, but you still have lots of possibilities. Determinism means the environment determines exactly what you're going to do. That's basically the idea of determinism. Looking at this, though, now population pyramids, I think you guys just refresh your memory on those. Skim through your books, it could be okay. You should know that one of our biggest issues for the future is all that population growth, all the stage 2 and 3 countries in the world. Have an idea of how some of these terms like density and things like that, or birth rate or other things might apply to the United States. Know the stages of the demographic transition. Okay. Stage 1, high birth rate, high death rate. You enter stage 2 when your death rate drops, but your birth rate stays high. You enter stage 3 when your birth rate starts to drop. You enter stage 4 when the birth rate and death rate start to become even to each other. You enter stage 5 when your death rate goes above your birth rate. All right. So at first you have a high birth rate, high death rate. That's stage 1. And stage 4 is you have a low birth rate, low death rate. All right. Okay, negative relationship means that as one goes up, the other goes down. Positive means as one goes up, the other goes up. So infant mortality rate, as that goes down, the birth rate goes down. Like, these are things that you develop more. Death rate is not a good one because that goes up and down. Your growth rate, as that goes up, your infant mortality rate is more likely to go down. Your birth rate would go up with your natural increase rate. It's because the more developed you get, your infant mortality rate is going to go down,
Your birth rate's going to go down at the same time. And your NIR is going to go down. Never mind. Let me rephrase that. So infant mortality rate, crude birth rate, child mortality rate, all of those would go down as you develop. Total fertility rate would go down as you develop. So what would be a good one? What would be an opposite one? What would be a good example? Oh, as you develop, your human development index score goes higher as you develop. And of course, a lot of these ones go lower as you develop. So there's a good example. Okay. And you should know what Malthus and Neo-Malthusians. Malthus was about food. Neo-Malthusians were about all resources. Malthus wrote in the 1800s and thought we couldn't keep up with supply. Now, Neo-Malthusians say the world's more population than ever, and they say it's about resources. Okay. Okay. We talked a little bit about this in class, in some of my classes. Distribution of minorities at every level. Okay. The most numerous minority is Hispanics. Mexicans and Puerto Ricans are the largest groups for Hispanics. Then African Americans, then Asians. Asians are now coming over in fairly big numbers. We'll see what happens now. But up until about the last 10 years or so, Hispanics were the number one group coming into America. So Hispanics are number one, at around 15, maybe more percent of the population. African Americans around 10 to 12, maybe around 10% of the population, and Asians around 5% of the U.S. population right now. Okay, nation, just like an ethnic group, but wants political power and territory. State means country, and notice we've had more countries created after World War II. A lot of countries, there are around 200 of them now. A lot of them created after World War II because of the end of colonization. Nation state, I think you know, a multi-state nation, that'd be like Koreans or Germans, a group that exists in a couple of countries. Gerrymandering, that's when you rig the map so that your group wins more and it makes the next election less competitive. Sovereignty, the right to run your own country. Self-determination, right? People to determine who their leaders are. You know what centripetal and centrifugal forces are. We've gone over that a lot. Okay, ethnic cleansing and genocide are not that far different. And as we mentioned, ethnic cleansing means you're trying to forcibly remove a group, but quite often you're doing that very violently. You're killing people. So it's only a hair's difference from genocide, but it is slightly different from genocide, which means you're just trying to all out kill everyone. Geno meaning kind of like genetics, and side meaning kill, like pesticide, suicide. Apartheid was a system of segregation that exists in South Africa. Nationality, we talked about this. It's got to be allegiance to a kind of a political and territorial group. And so if you're Scottish, even though you're in the United Kingdom, you can say that your nationality is Scottish because Scotland exists separately. It is a territory, and they do feel an allegiance towards it. In the United States, for the most part, we really have like one nationality. Microstates, under 1,000 kilometers, I believe, is what they are. They're small countries. I may end up giving. There's a question on this. I may end up giving territoriality, the belief that you should have territory. One thing to mention about territoriality. There was Ratzel who had an organic theory. Ratzel, R-A-T-Z-E-L, organic theory that people want land. Hitler was really into that, the idea of Lebensraum and wanting territory. EU, the European Union, open borders for business. That was the main thing behind that. It helped to promote trade because businesses could deliver goods without having to wait at the border or anything along those lines. No taxes on goods that go across the border. NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, becoming very big today. The idea that you could go across the border from Mexico to the United States to Canada with goods, that is only goods. The border is not open, but trade exists and goes across the borders. The United Nations is the political organization for countries to get together and discuss issues. We'll go over these in much more depth next semester. Okay. Federal versus unitary government. A federal government is one that gives more power to the provinces. We are seeing more of this as of late. And it's because multinational states are trying to give more representation to different ethnic groups. Unitary means there's one set of rules for everyone in the country. Nation states, dictators, that kind of thing tend to go unitary. Notice there's a tendency. Multinational tend to be federal. Nation states tend to be unitary. That's not always the case. Western Europe is one of the biggest areas for nation states, and the area where from 1800 till now they've been growing. That's where a lot of it started. Okay,
We already mentioned some of these countries. Ukraine is split between Russians, Ukrainians. Spain has the Spanish, the Catalones, the Basques. Belgians, the Walloon, and the Flemish. Nigeria is divided between the Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba tribes. That's the Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. Not a huge deal about that, but Muslims and Christians in the north and south, so that's more federal. Sudan split apart into two countries, and the south being more animist Christian and African descent, and the north being more Islamic and Arab descent. Rwanda split apart between the Hutu, Tutsi, and the Twa of those tribes, but mainly the Hutu killing the Tutsi was the big issue there. Okay. I get it? Hold on. Okay. Nationalities in America versus other countries we did. Devolution means a country is either one of two things, giving more power to the provinces or breaking apart. Shatter belt is an area of instability where countries are at risk for breaking apart. So an area where that seems to be occurring. So you could argue that part of Africa where northern Africa meets up with the southern Africa is a bit of a shatter belt. Balkanization refers to, all right, let's pay attention to this. This is more about the breakup of a country along ethnic lines than anything else. Be clear on that. That's what it refers to more than anything. We talk about Israel and Palestine. Borders, demarcate, to mark a border, to limit, to drawn on a map, define, to come up with a legal definition, and admin to run it. Operational, how the border operates. These are the issues that you could have. Allocational, resource issues. Definitional, is the definition good or not? Locational, an issue you can have is how it's located. Superimposed, that's the idea that the boundaries were put on by others, like the boundaries in Africa being put on by Europeans. Relic, a boundary that no longer exists, like East and West Germany. Subsequent and antecedent borders. Antecedent means the border existed before people. Subsequent means the border was put on after people were already there, like the separation between North and South Korea in that DMZ zone, right? Okay, supranationalism, also sometimes known as supranationalism, is when three or more countries decide to join together. Okay, and so it's some sort of organization which holds power over them. There's got to be at least three countries or so. So NAFTA, we would say, changed the operational use of a border. We talked about our ideal countries for nation states. That's the previous slide, but that was Japan, Iceland, and Denmark. Okay, we got a lot. Speaking of issues with countries and nations and states and all that, remember when India formed? It was originally Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India all together as one thing, but then they separated according to religious lines, and that caused a wide-scale migration of Hindus to India and Muslims to Pakistan. Okay. We actually covered this. I think that's it. I think we've got it. So sorry it took a long time, but hey, went through a lot of questions, and hopefully this will help you out quite a bit on the test. Okay. I'll put the handout up as well.